ஏதன் கண்ணே நிலையாகி இருந்திடும் உலகமெல்லாம் எதனதெல்லாம் எதனின்று அனைத்துலகும் எழுமோ மற்றிவையாவும் எதன் பொருட்டாம் எதனால் வையமெல்லாம் எழுந்திடும் எல்லாமும் எதுவே ஆகும் அதுதானே உளபொருளாம் சத்தியமாம் அச்சொருபம் அகத்தில் வைப்பான் பிறந்த தேவன் தன் பிரம்ம மூலத்தே பிறந்த தேவன் நான் என்று பேடி பிறந்தான் அவனே பிறந்தான் அவன் இதமோனீசன் அவன் 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 தினமும் நாடு பிறந்த தேவன் தன் பிரம்ம மூலத்தே பிறந்த தேவன் நான் என்று பேடி பிறந்தான் அவனே பிறந்தான் அவன் இதமோனீசன் அவன் நவன் அவன் அவன் தினமும் நாடு. Namo Ramana. By Bhagavan's immense grace, we have come to the last verse in the second part of Ulladu Narpadu Anubandham. The first part was Satsanga Prakaranam. The second part is Anma Tattva Prakaranam. The truth about the Anma Swarupam. We had seen from verses 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and finally we are in the 11th verse. In the commentary by Sri Lakshman Sharma, this is mentioned that this verse was first written by Sri Lakshman Sharma himself in Sanskrit and translated into Tamil by Bhagwan and included in the Anubandham. Kanakamal of course points out that such verses have been written by Bhagavan in early 1911-1912 when his first Jayanti was being celebrated as to how one should treat one's birth in the body and how one should treat one's birth in Brahmamulam. But this verse, the source is given by the authentic commentary as Sri Lakshman Sharma sir's Sanskrit verse, which has been translated by Bhagavan. Let us read the verse once more. பிறந்த தேவன் தன் பிரம்மமூலத்தே பிறந்த தேவன் நான் என்று பேடி. So here that pedi is the root point or root word that by who is born by seeking as to what is the source or the Brahma Moolam from which I arise, the I thought arises, he alone is to be said as really born. Sadhvam Swamigal writes, who is born, who is really born? When Annam is called as Brahman in Taittiriya Upanishad, we should understand that real Annam, real food is Brahman. So, who is really born? Who is born? Know that he alone is truly born. He alone is really born. He alone has taken real birth. Who is born in his own source? The Brahman. by scrutinizing where was I born or whence am I. So this is the first part. The first part is he alone can claim true birth or real birth. Who scrutinizing whence am I? What is the source from which I have arisen? And is born into that source, the Brahman, he alone can claim to be truly born. And the second part is about the nature of that he is eternal, he is the Lord of the sages, Munishan, Navan Navan. He is ever new. He is eternally new. Know this. Nadu is given the meaning as know this. So what we are led to know is that what is true birth, what can be called true birth, and what is really to be celebrated by abiding as that true birth itself is that birth which we take in the Brahma Moolam, in the source, by inquiring whence am I? By inquiring with bhakti that there is a source from which I arise, or the I arises, and one is born into that Brahma Moolam, he alone can be, now the he becomes a pointer alone, such a one alone can be said to be really born. Then three indications are given about such a Brahmajnani. He is eternal, he is the Lord of all sages, Munisan, and finally Munisan, Navan Navan. He is ever new. Know this. This is the content of the verse. Now we go into the pointers given by Kanakamal and Sri Lakshman Sharma sir as usual. The main pointer being that the birth in the Brahman takes one beyond the clutches of time. Beyond the clutches of time. It is time that makes everything old. Once we record events in terms of time, that is what brings in the relativity of relatively new and relatively old. And the Brahma Moolam, the birth in the Brahma Moolam, clearly both the commentators say is beyond the reaches of time. That is what makes the birth in the source of the I as ever new, as eternal, as the king or the lord of all sages. Now let us go into the words and where they take us. The words contained in this verse are that what is real birth, or the birth in the Brahma Moolam alone can be called as real birth. Now we find that Bhagavan has many a time guided the seekers to real namaskaram, to real waking, to real sleep by pointing out the self. By pointing out abiding in the self alone can be called real. The adjective real can be appended only to the self, only to the Brahman. The rest cannot really be called real, is the indication. Bhagavan wouldn't interfere with each and every word, but in significant places where someone would be giving too much importance and doing compulsive namaskarams, Take one step, do one namaskaram. Take one step, do one namaskaram, and go around him. And when everybody is going to follow suit, that's when Bhagavan brings out this that real namaskaram is the merger of the ego in the Brahman, in the source. The Guru, who is the Brahman, will not be deceived by mere physical genuflections or physical namaskarams, he would say, to point out that the real namaskaram is to abide in the self. Another instance of real namaskaram is when someone would ask Bhagavan, how you who claim to be Advaitin, which means lower than the lowest, how do you accept pranams or namaskarams from others? And Bhagavan would say, don't you see, don't you know that even before they start doing namaskaram, I am already prostrate in front of them. I have already done namaskaram to them. To abide in the self is to be ever namaskaram, is the essence of humility. The sage, any of the sages, we see sages reveal their humility in various ways. One of the sages that we know goes to the extent of saying that he is the worm in the excrement of the devotees. He himself says that he is as low as that, but he is one with the greatest powers that one can see. But he claims like that. But abiding in the self is far greater than any claim. Abiding in the self is the real humility. You can append the term real to abiding in the self. That's why Bhagavan says, even before they have started doing their namaskaram, I am already prostrate in front of them. I am already in namaskaram to them. That is the significance of the word real birth. Now, from there we are taken to the Vibhuti Yoga, which while discussing the Bhagavad Gita Sara of Bhagavan, one of the books that Venkatesh had given me at that time, which as usual providentially he landed up at exactly the required time. There the chapter 10 was dealt with, and the highest vibhuti is to abide in the self. In verse 10-20, chapter 10, verse 20, Sri Krishna says, Ahamatma Gudakesha Sarvabhuta Shayastitaha Aham Adischa Madhyamcha Bhutanam Antamayacha. And that is the highest vibhuti. In the following verses, he says, the indication by the great one who had commented on this chapter was that only those who cannot follow the self or worship the self need to embark on the other vibhutis. The other vibhutis indicated by Sri Krishna as objects of worship, which we can take as objects of worship, because the self is the vibhu. It has permeated everything. So the self can instruct. If you can't worship me as the self, then worship me as the highest Rudra, as the highest in mantras, as the highest in Rutus, as highest in the Vedas. Like this, the Vibhuti Yoga goes. Highest or real, the real Annam, the real Rishi is the self. That's what we come upon from this verse. And this verse is the starting point or the source for our worship of Bhagavan, worship of the self with Nama and Rupa, and of the greatest order. The Nama and Rupa of the greatest order that we can see, they all become worship worthy, and they all lead us to the self ultimately, because they are all permeated by the self. There, interestingly, as an aside, Sri Krishna in verse 37 says that he is the cunningness within the cunning. He is the cunningness within the cunning, and that's a great relief to us. You may be wondering why that how come that he is the cunningness within the cunning, and that is a great relief that since the self is limitless, since the self is infinite, he is the infinite cunningness. That's why we have the story from Buddha where we see that the cunning tailor is reported to Buddha. Cunning tailor who is defrauding everybody is reported to Buddha. Buddha says to the persons who are complaining, don't worry, you do your sadhana, you do your enlightenment practices. He will be taken care of by the nature of the truth. The truth is infinite. He is worshipping the truth as cunningness. He will meet a cunningness greater than his and be defeated. Buddha goes ahead and tells a story of the crane and the crab we have seen. But the beauty of the infinitude of the self and the vibhuti is that those who are pursuing the adharma, those who are pursuing dharma need not worry about them. We need not stand in judgment. There is a great relief to those who are following dharma and bhakti and atmaucharam. In this fact that Sri Krishna says that he is the cunning within the cunning, and he is whatever you can think of as adharma, he is the infinite of that. Because those who choose that will be finally absorbed by defeat, and those who choose this side will be gradually, if they are taking the gradual path, gradually absorbed into the self through love, through embracing, and in that path. So that is how those two paths also find their source in the self, in the vibhuti of the Atman. So the real birth takes us to that inquiry of vibhuti, and then we go. This is the real birth. The real birth is birth in the source or the Brahma Moolam. Then we go on to the discussion of, and Bhagavan of course gives us the hint that why do we wear vibhuti, is that vibhuti in talk number 89 Bhagavan says there are two types of vibhutis. One is the para and apara. The apara vibhuti which we wear is the sacred ash. It is symbolic of the para vibhuti which is the self, where all relativity is gone and only absolute being remains. That is the para vibhuti, Bhagavan says. So the reality of the birth in the Brahman brings us to the vibhu, the vibhuti, that which permeates everything, and that opens up the what was given to us in the previous verse by Bhagavan of worship in the Arunachala Nama and in the Nama and Rupa. That is what the self, the reality of the self lends itself to in Vibhuti Yoga. Now, one of the discussions that came up was that is this abiding in the I or the self or the birthplace or Brahma Moola, is it of since it is the it is itself called as God, Yoga, Kundalini, and other names. Bhagavan says in the talks that it is the I which is called by these different names. The pointer that comes is abiding in this source, abiding in the Brahma Moolam is the best thing we can do because that alone, that Brahma Moolam or the I alone is called by the different names of deities, the highest deities whom we worship. All those names are names of the I, says Bhagavan. In the talks in two different places, he says that it is this I which is called by different names of deities. Now, what greater benefit can one bring upon oneself and within inverted commas the world than abiding and finding the truth of the Supreme, God, Kundalini, or Bhakti, Jnana, whatever names it is called. It is all the Brahma Moolam, the I, which is called all that. And Bhagavan says, abiding in that, what else can be brought in as the best contribution that one can make, best duty that one can do to what one considered as a world apart from oneself earlier. That can't be. And Bhagavan goes ahead in talk number 513, he goes ahead and says, even if you think of in terms of Saguna, there he is interpreting the Upanishads. In fact, he is interpreting the Nakarmana. The Nakarmana shloka translated by Major Chadwick. Over 2 talks, he has interpreted that. It is simply beautiful. It takes us through the enquiry into Saguna and Nirguna. Bhagavan says Brahmaloka can be taken as the self, the nameless and formless self. However, the Upanishads also interpret it in the Saguna, in the Krama Mukti. In terms of Krama Mukti, the interpretation in 513 given by Bhagavan is that these interpretations are present in Upanishads and in the Brahma Sutras. Bhagavan says Brahmaloka is a loka where Brahman is the supreme, and in that loka, this is interpretation in talk number 513, in that loka, from that loka there is no return, there is no rebirth. So in terms of Saguna, to be born in Brahma Loka is real birth. In terms of Saguna, Bhagavan interprets the Nakarmana in that way. You can see in talk 530. There he says that Bhagavan says that one can attain other lokas by desiring them. The other lokas that are there can be attained by desiring them, but Brahma Loka is reached within inverted commas by giving up all desires. Only those who are completely desireless find themselves in this loka, and practically the age of Brahman is infinite. And when Brahman ends his life, all the residents of the Brahma Loka attain the Mukti, is the statement given by Bhagavan there. Now, that is the Krama Mukti definition. If we look like that, if we look upon the journey, inverted commas, like that, in the Saguna, then too we find that those who are practicing Atma Vicharam or the birth in the Brahma Moolam, what is being brought here is this very earth, which is unreal, which is permeated by that Brahma Loka. All the higher lokas, higher states permeate this world. So, practice of Atma Vicharam is literally bringing Brahma Loka here, or seeing the Brahma Loka in this. The clue is given by Bhagavan as to how to practice this, how to be a resident of Brahma Loka though the body is here. Bhagavan gives to a Maharani in talk 244. We have often visited that talk, but at the cost of repetition, let us look at that once again as to how the birth in the Brahma Moolam is the real duty that we are all seeking to perform. We are all duty bound, we are all duty conscious, but what is the real duty that is called upon each one of us is to be born in the Brahma Moolam. He says to Maharani, I will go to the last part of that discussion in talk 244. The Maharani is suggested partial surrender by Bhagavan, but she sidesteps it. She doesn't believe in that partial surrender can work, though Bhagavan himself says partial surrender will work. Then she asks a beautiful question on all our behalf. She says that instead of seeing the shortcomings of human beings, of those around us, in fact, not only human beings, of everything around us, instead of seeing the shortcomings of everything around us, if we see the God in them, instead of reviewing what all mistakes everybody has made, after 30 years also he is doing this, after 60 years also that person is doing this. Now, instead of just beating the chaff like this, as Buddha would say, instead of analyzing the faults of others, what the Maharani says, if one learns the art of seeing God in everything, then one finds eternal peace. Is it not? She asks. If I can, instead of looking the shortcomings of everything around me, if I can see God in each and every object, then I can come into the peace of Brahman Bhulam. Is it not? Bhagavan says, this has to be done within. The seeing of God in everyone has to be done within. She specifically says, no, I don't want, I am not asking your teaching of seeing Brahman inside. I am asking, how am I to see God in the chair, in that human being, in one whom I was judging? And he says, to think of another person is an operation of mind. And to conceive God in that person is another operation of mind. And mind being unreal, mind being present in waking state and absent in deep sleep, being unreal, it cannot be the instrument with which one can see God in everyone. Therefore, Bhagavan says, the consciousness within, purged of the mind, is felt as God. The consciousness within, when one abides in that consciousness, the Brahma Moolam, purging it of the mind, purging it of all thoughts, then that consciousness itself, the Brahma Moolam itself, is felt as God, Bhagavan says. Now, that is to literally bring this, the Brahma Loka, into this world, to see God in everyone by seeing the Brahman within, and not even the Saguna Upasana that I am in Brahma Loka, but the consciousness feeling itself as purged of all thoughts, that is the simultaneous seeing of all others, all the worlds, and oneself as that pure consciousness. That is literally bringing Brahma Loka into, that is the real celebration of real birth. Now, that is completion of one's duty, because this very world is now permeated by the Brahma Loka or the Brahman, and that truth alone is perceived and held in abiding in the Brahma Moolam. So that is what we come from the first part of this verse, that is Piranda Devan tan Brahma Moolate Piranda Devan nan endru pedi Pirandan avane Pirandan Nidamunisan Navan Navan Avan Dinamum Nad. So we come to the second part of the verse, which deals with the nature of such a one, the nature of Bhagavan, the nature of our dear one, the one who has brought us to Atma Vicharam, the Bhagavan. First of all, the one who is born in the Brahmambulam and who blocks us from celebrating his Jayanti in 1911, 1912. He says, Bhagavan says, they all started doing Pradakshina around me, Gummi. They were doing Gummi party, and the crazy fellows were dancing around me. He says, Ramasamy Iyer and others. And I told them, what is this you are doing? You are celebrating the birth of the body. And I tried to stop them, he says, stop them from starting that wonderful occasion of Jayanti. And Ramasamy Iyer says, no, this is not for you. We are not celebrating for your sake. We are celebrating for our sake, for our sadhana. And Bhagavan says, then I could do nothing. I could do no further. That's how the Jayanti celebrations have started and existed and continue to thrill us all and remind us about self-inquiry every year. This song has some source in that says Kanakamal, which is no wonder. Then the second part is the nature of the one who is born in the Brahma Mulam is eternal. He is the Lord of all sages, and he is ever new. Eternality we have been allowed to discuss by the great commentators that the eternality comes from being out of time. That the clutches of time do not touch such a one. In tradition, there are two types of eternalities that are discussed. That is, there are supposed to be the great beings, and whom Bhagavan does not deny in the talk. When somebody asks, is Vishnu subject to pralaya? Is Vishnu subject to cosmic dissolution? Bhagavan says, I am saying you, a jiva, can practice Atma Vicharam and cross pralaya. Now, why should Vishnu be subject to pralaya? So he doesn't deny this world. He doesn't deny that those beings, those gods who have crossed pralaya, who appear in every cycle of creation again. But is that the eternality referred in this verse? We have to say no, because in Ulladu Narpadu and in Anubandham, Bhagavan refers to that eternality or that self which is beyond time and space. Namandri nadedu 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 நாம் உடம்பேல் நாள் நாட்டுள் நாம் படுவோம் நாம் உடம்போ நாம் இன்றென்று என்றும் ஒன்று நாடு இங்கம் எங்கும் ஒன்று நாம் உண்டு நாள் நாடில் நாம். That verse in Ulladu Narpadu, maybe the 16th or 15th or 16th verse, which says that time and space cannot exist apart from the self. Namandri naaledu nadedu. Can time and space exist apart from the self? No. Nam udambel naal naatul naan paduvam. Sadhuvam says, the moment we identify with the body, 1962 born, average age of Indian something. So ending some other point. Starting here, ending here. So Nam udambel naal naatul naan paduvam. Both in time and space, I am stuck. Namudambo. Am I this body? Am I the consciousness trapped inside the body? No. I am that Brahma Moolam. I am the Brahma Moolam into which my real birth is happening. Namudambo. Nam indru andru endrum undru. Yesterday, today and tomorrow, we are ever the self. Nadu ingu angu engum undru. Whether the body is in this place, that place or some other place, always I am the same. Therefore, Namundu, the self alone is Nal Nadu Il. There is no time and space in the self. Nam. That is the eternality referred to by Bhagavan. It is not merely the crossing over of cosmic dissolution and being available for one more cycle of birth and death. He takes us beyond that plane itself of cycle of events. So that is the concept of eternality. Now, one thing that comes up in my mind that is this a disrespect to Murugar, whom I have worshipped, who has clearly, the worship of whom has clearly brought me all the way in places where I cannot even imagine the darkness of. Obviously not. Bhagavan is not asking us to do something that will disrespect the ladders which have brought us. These are all elevators that have brought us, not even ladders. We don't know how to climb. They are elevators which have elevated us for reasons unknown to us, totally undeserved. That's why they are called, it is called as grace of God. Now, it is not a disrespect, because now in the self there is nothing other than Murugar. There is only Murugar. The worship of Murugar is now brought to its apex. Murugar is the Parabrahman. Now, there is nothing apart from Murugar. He is not the deity who is protecting the Tamil or the families which are worshipping him, he is not that deity which is in that hill alone. No, he is the one on whom Edankande Nilayagi Irundidumu Ulagamelam, that is Murugan. In which all these prapanchas, all these lokas exist, for whom and what these all are, that is our Murugan. So there is no disrespect of the one who has brought us up all this way and asked us to do self-inquiry. So that is the eternality. Of course, one doesn't need to discuss the Lord of the sages, because we have him in all facets right in front of us as Ramana Maharshi. So that is a task which I need not take up. Just any one of us thinking of him, I will not think of anything else other than that he has shown what it is to be born in the Brahma Moolam. Avan Nidam Munisan Navan Navan. This Navan Navan is the special part of this verse, because it gives us one additional facet. And the intellect and the human beings, we see an affinity towards the new. We see a liking to celebrate the new, and of course we find the intellect very, very averse to authority and tradition and pressure. As the intellect of the children are becoming subtler, they lose the benefit of respect. They lose the benefit of experience of others, but they gain the advantage of freedom. It is clearly understood in spirituality that there cannot be any praise of the old or praise of the new. One has to take one's present and go to the source and be there. So there is no condemnation of the past, or there is no praise of either the past or the present or the new in this. But we see, for a moment, we meditate on what is the benefit and drawback of new and old. We find that a lot of modern research has gone into this, because we are all tending towards the intellect. There is a research by Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, where he has done a tremendous work in this area, that how the mind works. He says type 1, type 2 are the two stages we have in the brain and in the mind. The ways it works is, whenever it comes to something new, whenever it is taking up a skill that it is facing anew, it is attentive. The brain or the mind is attentive, and it waits for areas it doesn't know. Very attentively it gathers, assimilates, but it has this habit of putting it into type 2, which has its benefits. The type 2 is a place where once a skill is mastered, it becomes routine, like driving a car, taking a bath, walking. All these things in nature itself, it says that this type 2, or a skill from treating new into automatic mode, is a mode of survival. Many things you can keep in auto mode and pay attention to the dangers of survival. So he says this is how the brain works. So the problem with this method is that, because we have this type 2, many intuitions and many meditations which comes in type 2, that is, which comes in without attention, we take that to be a feed and apply that in living. Like this point is very clear when we see the talks from the modern philosophers like Chomsky, who say that what is the difference between Galileo or Newton and others is that they did not take what they see for granted. They did not think that the falling of this or the remaining of the going up of smoke is something to be taken for granted, or type 2 thought, which is called as fast thinking by Kahneman. They paid attention. They treated it as anew. They looked at it with new eyes. Therefore, they could discover certain other things. Is his suggestion. Therefore, the advantage of going with the new or treating the Atma Ucharam as new is that the discovery is afresh. But we have to see the danger also. When this new, and that is very practically seeable, observable, when we take the inquiry to be new and apply it to objects, there is lot of errors there, because then we mistake that the anubhava has to be expressed anew in different words, in different arguments. Somebody presents, let us say, this is what Ramana told. Oh, is that your anubhava? Unless you tell your anubhava, that is of no use. Then you tell something, then no, no, this is there in that code. After all, everything has to be said between A to Z. There is nothing new. So therefore, if you apply the new to this area of multiplicity, there are problems in the psyche, that you will get into compulsive behavior, compulsive arguments, and compulsive behavior, which is a whole field of study. So the best way to look at the Brahma Moolam is the new has to be taken as a support given to us, but it has to be taken with a pinch of salt. The Brahman is the new beyond the opposites of new and old, modern and tradition. The Brahman is the Sanatana. So it is older than the oldest, but still beyond the duality of old and new. That is the best approach. And we also have to meditate on the Saguna and Nirguna Upasana. One brief point on that, and we will close this discussion. In the Nirguna Upasana, what I have observed is that somebody taking up Nirguna Upasana of observing thoughts and coming to thought-free state, one rule will help, that if we take up that Nirguna Upasana, that we should also have a rule, which is Saguna, not to disturb any Saguna Upasakas. Not to disturb, because Nirguna Upasana will lead to partial egolessness on the way, partial egolessness in certain areas. Suppose we use that to disturb the Saguna Upasakas, we dig our own trenches of darkness. So if somebody is practicing, this is of course without surrender to Bhagavan. If somebody is practicing just observing of thoughts, then it is better to have one rule, one Saguna Upasana rule, that we should not disturb any Saguna Upasaka, because it is in Saguna Upasana that we gather the strength of tapas, the strength of dhyana, the strength of vichara, the strength of spirituality is gathered, and it brings us to that position where we are taken by the Saguna Ishvara into our readiness to Nirguna Upasana. The best approach would be surrender to the Saguna Brahman outside, the Ishvara, Ramaneshwara outside, and practice Atma Vicharam inside. Atma Vicharam, of course, has Saguna Upasana embedded, because Bhagavan does not take us directly to the Nirguna. He says that when you inquire who am I, there will arise I. There will arise the Supreme Brahman as Aham, iti Sakshat, Atma Rupena Bhati. It is manifested form of the self that raises and supports you and consumes you. So Atma Vicharam with Bhagavan's grace can be practiced without the drawbacks of some of the teachings which directly lead us to the thought-free state of dropping thoughts. Atma Vicharam doesn't have that danger, especially Bhagavan's grace, which is ever with us when surrendered to, makes this path the safest and the direct and the golden path that our Guru has drawn for us. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. With Bhagavan's grace, let us sit in practice of Atma Vicharam for about 10 minutes.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana. Shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of that self, which ever shines in us and which is manifest as Bhagavan, we have been able to delve into the verse of Anubandham, where Bhagavan indicates his own glory and very sweetly brought out by Nandakumarji. And that glory, because of which Bhagavan told Mother Azhagamma, Angangirundu Aattu Vippan. So that the infinite, the power which is everywhere, and because it is anga means appo, every moment also, because space and time are actually two sides of the same coin. So Bhagavan is here saying navo, every moment. And Nandakumarji rightly highlighted that point, that every moment is not even the now as we understand it in the time continuum of past, present and future. It is beyond the realm of time. That now or that newness, because of the nowness, is beyond the realm of time as we understand it. And it is possible to comprehend it only by the true birth in the self. Because actually, if we see, why does Bhagavan say it is the real birth? And again, we were reminded by Nandakumarji that he says that alone is real. It is the real birth and it is also the real death, to die into that. That is the beauty. So it is the only real. There is nothing apart from that which is real. Why is it the real birth? Because if we think we are now born, but every moment we are dying. See, actually, this birth is a death. This birth which we have taken is a death. Not only is the last date written over there when we are born, but in our earlier discussions, Nandakumarji has referred to certain scientific discoveries which are saying that within a week the whole body is dead, it's changing. In fact, I am told, I am not so familiar with Sanskrit, but I am told that the words in Sanskrit for the body, there are different words for each stage of the body's existence. And the last one is Sharira, that which actually it comes down, it decays. So there is death in every moment. If we are identified with the body, there is death in every moment. There is no birth. There's really no birth. And there's really no death, because again there is birth. So both are not there. Actually, there is neither birth nor death in reality. So Bhagavan says being born there alone is the true birth. It is the same with the thoughts as well. Because if we think that we are one thought, also the birth, if we identify with the birth of a thought, which actually is the identification with the body, again that also dies. Every aspect, not only the physical body, every thought dies. There is no thought we can hold on to. If we can hold on to a single thought changelessly, the mind itself changes. That's why Bhagavan says it's Eka Chintana. It will not stay. And this, it thinks, is the search for newness. It actually believes that in a new thought, in a new endeavor, there is something new, but there is nothing new in it. There is nothing new in our thoughts. Only the self can be new. There can be nothing else which is new, because it has got the whole load of memory along with it. Any one thought if I have, then that thought is for Sharada. Now Sharada is a memory. Without memory, where will Sharada be? So there cannot be any thought for me without a past. So if past is completely erased, what happens? Only the newness remains. And Bhagavan is saying that person is eternal. Because this question often comes to people, whether one needs a living guru, so-called living guru. And this question had come to me also. And that question coming to me was Bhagavan's grace, of course, like everything that comes to us in all our lives. once we have come to Bhagavan, we can take it that Bhagavan is planning everything for us. But nonetheless, the question came to me, and that question took me to Muruganar Swami. And I would have shared that with everyone, and everyone, all the satsangis would know about my meeting with Muruganar and my asking him whether it is enough to take Bhagavan as a guru. Why? Because of the question coming of the living guru. And Muruganar Swami, of course, told me enough, 100% enough. And the beauty of these people, all the devotees of Bhagavan who have been born into Bhagavan truly, all the people who by the path of self-inquiry have been born into Bhagavan truly, the beauty is that they never question anything other than that ego. They would never have questioned anything else. They don't question it. That's why Nandakumarji says, we will not disturb anybody's faith. They just don't question. Once they are born in that, they don't question, because everything is that. Everything is that. He sweetly said that it is the entirety, it is the cunningness in the cunning person. Because it is the entirety. Because it has to be everything. And it has to be the poison in the snake. One of our songs in the ballet, in our dance ballet, is it is the poison in the snake. It is because that's the pride of the snake, right? So it's like that. It is the cunningness. It's that which, and why is the cunningness there? If we look at it from Saguna, it is the Leela of the Lord. And if we look at it from the Nirguna, the birth of the cunningness is in the same place as the birth of the goodness. And both the cunningness and the goodness are only thoughts. That's what Bhagavan will tell us. So when we go back to the source, it is one and the same thing. So whichever the manifestation, its source is only the heart. Its source is only the self. And Bhagavan has here given the sadhana of Vensamai, which actually he gives to Gambiram Sheshayar, and it is to Shiva Prakasham Pillai he gives Who Am I? Similarly, I was just as I am now sharing this, it comes to my mind that in Upadesha Saram also, first Ahamayam Kuto Bhavati comes. Then the latter part, only in verse 28, we get Kim Swarupam Iti Atma Darshane. So Bhagavan mentions this source watching as a very important clue, and due to our earlier discussions, as well as in these satsangs, Nandakumarji has pointed out to us that may be called the Bhakti Marga of Vichara. The Vensamai may be called the Bhakti Marga of Vichara. I personally was guided by Vishwanatha Swami to go to the Vensamai, although it was Who Am I that had appealed to me, but I was not aware of Vensamai. I was not aware of the Bhagavan's teachings of the spiritual heart. And now it is, these things have come to light more, but in earlier years it was purely Who Am I which was talked about. And so that was there, and Vishwanatha Swami connected me to Vensamai, to the spiritual heart. In fact, another devotee, one Swami Ramanananda, he not the Ramanananda of Ramanashramam, but another Swami Ramanananda who used to live in Adiyannamalai, he said that Vishwanatha Swami wanted to guide him about the Vensamai. So he kept inviting him to his room, or kept inviting himself to his room. In one way or another, he wanted to make the connect. And he said he would talk about my cooking. Say, it's very tasty, won't you bring me something and come to my room? And I used to wonder, why is this Swami talking about the cooking and all that? And I would avoid him. I was avoiding all the other seniors because I did not want to get colored or anything different from what Bhagavan himself has said. I was worried about it. But when I went there, he actually, I think my memory is not 100% sure, but I can look back at it. He said he meditated along with him and awakened the experience of the spiritual heart. whereafter he lost the fear factor which had come to him for a long time. The fear, the conquest of fear had not happened in the self-inquiry, and Vishwanatha Swami actually introduced him to the source awareness. A.R. Natarajan, our founder president, he says, whence am I and who am I are like two blades of a scissor, and they go hand in hand, that the surrender and the inquiry by Bhagwan's great grace. He keeps giving us reminders of both in equal doses to keep the balance going, and also, as he says in Ashtakam, to allow whichever mind feels, whichever is apt for that, it will automatically gravitate towards that and hold it. So he gives the options to us in his various verses. Actually, Alan Jacobs also says that even in talks, you may read the whole talks, but something will suddenly grip you, and you can take that as belonging to you or your path. Similarly, in Anubandham also, there are so many clues which Bhagavan is giving us such beautiful clues. Every time we get a new clue. So there may be some clue which automatically awakens us, or again, as Nandakumar ji would say, it may clear some granthis for us and allow us to hold on better to self-inquiry. There may be some granthis which get cleared in the many bondages that we have. Some may get cleared by one of these clues which Bhagavan is giving to us. That's why he, in his great compassion, he is giving us these verses and allowing us to do manana on these verses and allowing us to sit for self-inquiry as well during the practice in that extraordinary grace. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ram.
Ramana